French President Emmanuel Macron has been outlining his key foreign policy lines today at the annual address to France's ambassadors around the world. It was a wide-ranging speech at the beginning of a global year that will be dominated by the decisions made by Donald Trump in the White House. Let's take a listen to some of what Macron said.
Whatever happens, we need to be able to give lasting support to Ukraine so that they can resist and be in the best possible negotiating position. The United States must help us to change the situation and convince Russia to come to the negotiating table. And the Ukrainians must have realistic discussions on territorial issues, and only they can do this.
Well, for more analysis on this, I'm joined now by our international affairs editor, Philip Turle, who joins me on set. Hi, Philip.
Hello, Angela.
Hi. So, not surprisingly, Macron talked about the Middle East, Ukraine, Washington's influence on all of that. Give us a flavour of what he said this morning.
OK, well, he said that the two main challenges, of course, for 2025 will be the war in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine, and in particular, underlining the fact that, in his view, there's going to have to be some kind of compromise as far as Ukraine is concerned. All of this being dependent on what happens once Donald Trump gets into the White House on the 20th of January. He said that Ukraine needs to have what he called realistic expectations because Russia is already occupying 20% of Ukrainian territory. And there will be no quick and easy solution to the war in Ukraine. And both sides at the moment are trying to cash in on their advances, with the Ukrainians in the region of Kursk inside Russian territory, the Russians inside the eastern part of Ukraine, to put themselves in the strongest position possible if and when those negotiations take place. Problem being that Donald Trump, who's going to take power on the 20th of January, said he's going to sort out the Ukrainian problem pretty quickly. He said within 24 hours, but we don't have any idea about what that plan is right now. So what Emmanuel Macron has been doing here is to sort of flatter Donald Trump, offer him an olive branch, saying that France is willing to work with Donald Trump. France already worked with him between 2016 and 2020. They got on quite well, but Donald Trump is someone who has very strong positions, someone who's very strong-minded, and France cannot be weak when it comes to working with Donald Trump, and neither can Europe. Donald Trump only will respect people who are hard and who stand up for their ideas. And that's why he said that Ukraine has got to be in a strong negotiating position with Donald Trump once those negotiations, if they begin later this year. But there is reason to believe that there will be some movement as far as negotiations are concerned sometime during 2025.
And I mean, not unrelated, this issue, of course, of Europe and its defence capabilities. It's something Emmanuel Macron often takes a strong stance on. He had a pretty clear message on that.
Yeah,
didn't he?
The defence issue is something you're quite right that Emmanuel Macron does come back to quite often in his speeches. He's obviously quite concerned about the fact that Europe is pretty much dependent on outside help for its defences, particularly from the United States. He's rattled on a lot in the last few years about the fact that Europe has to be more independent as far as creating its own defence mechanisms are concerned, and that it can't carry on depending on support from the United States, not only in the future but right now, because when Donald Trump takes power, there may be a change in the attitude of the United States towards Europe, and Europe cannot afford to be in a weak position when it comes to the threat from Russia and trying to sort out the war in Ukraine and a possible future for Ukraine, which would be in Europe's interest. So he said the question is whether over the next 20 years Europe will be able to produce what it needs for its security, or whether it won't be able to produce that, and whether it's still dependent on American industrial and technological defence and know-how. We will face cruel dilemmas, he said, and problems organising our own defence if we don't take our defence in hand and get that up and running as quickly as possible.
And there is always one area of particular interest for France, its relationship with Africa, its former colonies and other economies in Africa. What did he have to say about that? We're seeing increasingly France losing influence in Africa.
Well, in fact, Emmanuel Macron was contradicting what many people say, and particularly on that issue about France pulling out, losing influence, not being as strong in Africa as it was, face-to-face with the Russians and the Chinese who have been moving into the African continent. He said that's not true. France is still in a strong position in Africa. He said, look, we've been in countries where we were asked to go in to help fight terrorism. There's not a single African leader who can say that they would have a sovereign state if the French military hadn't intervened to help them. But we never get thanks for that, and that's something that I've come to learn to live with. But what you're supposed to do when France has been asked to intervene to help fight terrorism in an African country, then there is a coup d'etat in that country, and France is told to leave. We have to go. We can't stay. But we are reorganizing. I think that the term that Emmanuel Macron was using during his press conference was one of being lucid, saying we are not losing ground. That is something that is often used to denigrate France, but in fact it's not true. And we are still a force to be reckoned with on the African continent. But of course, we have to turn the page on the colonial time of France. We have to work with the African countries. We have to work with the younger generations. And there is a whole new partnership that needs to be built with those younger generations that we are working towards in the future. Now, there are a couple of other issues that were quite interesting that Emmanuel Macron did drag up as well. One of them was about Elon Musk. He didn't actually name Elon Musk in person, but he said, could you believe that 10 years ago we would have even imagined that someone who was the owner of a high-tech social media would be pulling the shots in elections in Germany, for example, and in the United Kingdom intervening in politics there. That is something that we have to be very careful about, and also about the threat to democracy that what these new reactionaries are posing today, and that is something that he said he would always fight to defend.